Jake Martinez had been mopping the same grimy hallway for 3 hours straight. The night shift at Station Nova 7 wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. While other humans were out there negotiating trade deals or piloting fancy starships, Jake was perfectly content scrubbing alien goo off docking bay floors. Someone had to do it, and the pay wasn't half bad. The station was mostly quiet at this hour. Just the occasional hum of a cargo hauler passing through or the chittering of some insectoid species heading to the food court. Jake liked the peace. It gave him time to think, time to breathe. Back on Earth, he'd been a Marine, seen too much combat, lost too many friends. This simple life suited him just fine now. His pit bull Duke was supposed to be sleeping in the kennels like always. The station let Jake keep him there during shifts since most aliens were terrified of Earth dogs. Something about the teeth and the loyalty freaked them out. But tonight, Duke was losing his mind. Jake could hear the barking echoing through the maintenance corridors, getting louder and more frantic with each passing second. That wasn't like Duke at all. The old boy was usually calm, spent most nights snoring on his ratty blanket. Jake dropped his mop and started running, his boots splashing through puddles of cleaning solution. His heart pounded. Maybe Duke was hurt. Maybe some alien had messed with him. Jake had gotten into 3 fights already this month protecting his dog from species that thought Earth animals were pests. He burst through the kennel door, breathing hard. Duke was in his enclosure, but he wasn't hurt. He was terrified. The tough pit bull who'd faced down everything from space rats to aggressive alien tourists was cowering in the corner, whining like a puppy. His whole body was shaking. Then Jake saw why. Chained to Duke's collar was a creature Jake had only seen in station briefings and warning videos. A dragon hatchling. A real, actual dragon from the Draconii species. It was tiny, barely bigger than a cat, with scales that should have shimmered like oil on water but instead looked dull and lifeless. One of its delicate wings hung at a wrong angle, clearly broken. The little thing was breathing in shallow gasps. Jake's mouth went dry. His hands started shaking. This was bad. This was execution-level bad. Dragon hatchlings were Class A protected beings across 47 star systems. The Draconii didn't mess around when it came to their young. Possessing one, even accidentally, carried a mandatory death sentence. No trial, no appeal, just a quick vaporization. The chain connecting the hatchling to Duke was made of quantum-locked durasteel. Jake recognized it from his military days. Unbreakable. Untraceable. Expensive. Someone with serious resources had done this deliberately. This wasn't some accident or coincidence. Someone had chained a dying dragon baby to his dog's collar and left it for him to find. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. This was a setup. Had to be. But why him? He was nobody, just a janitor who kept his head down and did his job. Then it clicked. 3 weeks ago, he'd reported seeing unauthorized ships coming and going from the restricted docking bays. Ships that weren't on any official manifests. His supervisor had told him to forget about it, mind his own business. But Jake had filed a report anyway with station security. Someone wanted him gone. Someone wanted him dead. And what better way than to frame him for one of the galaxy's worst crimes? Jake should have called security right then. Should have reported the hatchling immediately and let the authorities sort it out. That was the smart play, the safe play. But as he knelt down beside Duke's enclosure, as those golden dragon eyes opened and looked directly at him, Jake saw something that made his chest tight. Fear. Pure, simple fear. The same look Duke had in his eyes when Jake found him in that alley back in Detroit, half-starved and beaten, left to die by humans who were supposed to care for him. Jake had taken Duke home that night even though his apartment didn't allow pets, even though he could barely feed himself. He'd risked eviction because it was the right thing to do. The hatchling made a small sound, barely a whimper. Its breathing was getting worse. Without proper care, it would be dead in hours, maybe less. Those burns on its scales, Jake recognized those too. Torture marks. Energy weapons set to low power, designed to cause maximum pain without killing. Someone had hurt this baby on purpose. Jake made his decision. He pulled out his maintenance keycard and overrode the kennel lock. Duke immediately pressed against his leg, still shaking but trusting Jake to make things right. The chain was too strong to break, but Jake managed to carefully lift both Duke and the hatchling together, supporting the dragon's injured wing. He had maybe 10 minutes before the next security patrol. His quarters were in the lower levels, in the human residential section where most aliens never bothered going. If he could get there without being seen, he might have a chance to figure this out. Might have a chance to save this little creature's life. As Jake hurried through the empty corridors with a dragon hatchling in his arms and his faithful dog limping beside him, he knew his simple life was over. Whatever came next, there was no going back. But looking down at that tiny, suffering creature, Jake Martinez couldn't bring himself to care about the consequences. Some things were worth risking everything for. Even if the whole galaxy thought he was crazy. Jake's quarters were barely big enough for one person, let alone a man, a dog, and a dying dragon. He kicked aside dirty laundry and cleared off his tiny workbench, laying down his jacket as a makeshift bed for the hatchling. Duke sat nearby, still connected by that impossible chain, watching with worried brown eyes. The dragon was fading fast. Its breathing had become raspy and weak. Jake had seen enough wounded soldiers to know what dying looked like, and this little creature was running out of time. He grabbed his old medic kit from under the bed, the one he'd kept from his Marine days. His hands worked automatically, the old training kicking in even though he'd never treated anything like this before. He stabilized the broken wing as best he could, using splints meant for human fingers. The hatchling whimpered but didn't fight him. Those golden eyes just watched him, trusting him somehow. Jake cleaned the burn marks with antiseptic, wincing at how deep some of them went. Whoever had done this had taken their time, had enjoyed causing pain. But the real problem was nutrition. The hatchling needed food, needed energy to heal. Jake tried everything he had. Protein paste, dried meat, even some expensive Tlaxian nutrient gel he'd been saving. The dragon wouldn't touch any of it. Its eyes were starting to dim, that golden glow fading to a dull yellow. Jake sat back against the wall, feeling helpless. He'd risked everything to save this creature, and it was going to die anyway in his cramped apartment. Duke whined and licked his hand, offering the only comfort he could. Then Jake remembered something. A story he'd heard in a bar 6 months ago from a drunk cargo hauler. The guy had been going on about ancient legends, about how dragons and humans used to have some kind of connection back in the old days. How human blood had special properties that dragons could use. Jake had thought it was nonsense, just another spacer tale told over too many drinks. But right now, nonsense was all he had left. Jake pulled out his utility knife and looked at his palm. This was probably the stupidest thing he'd ever done, and he'd done some pretty stupid things in his life. But watching that little dragon struggle for each breath, Jake figured stupid was better than doing nothing. He pressed the blade against his palm and made a quick cut. Blood welled up immediately, bright red against his calloused skin. He held his hand over the hatchling's mouth and let a few drops fall between those tiny fangs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dragon's eyes snapped open, burning bright gold like twin suns. Jake gasped as pain exploded through his entire body, starting at his hand and racing up his arm, into his chest, straight into his brain. It felt like someone had plugged him into a live electrical wire and cranked it to maximum. Images flooded his mind. Memories that weren't his. He saw vast planets made of crystal, saw fleets of dragons flying through nebulas, saw civilizations rising and falling across millions of years. He felt emotions that were alien yet somehow familiar. Curiosity. Loneliness. Hope. Fear. All of it crashed into him at once, overwhelming every sense he had. Jake tried to scream but no sound came out. His vision went white, then black, then filled with colors he didn't have names for. He was dimly aware of Duke barking, of his own body hitting the floor, but it all seemed very far away. The connection kept pulling him deeper, showing him more. He saw the dragon's recent memories now. Being stolen from a nest. Rough hands grabbing her. Pain. So much pain. Experiments. Tests. Burns. Then being chained to Duke, left as bait in a trap. But right now, nonsense was all he had left. Jake pulled out his utility knife and looked at his palm. This was probably the stupidest thing he'd ever done, and he'd done some pretty stupid things in his life. But watching that little dragon struggle for each breath, Jake figured stupid was better than doing nothing. He pressed the blade against his palm and made a quick cut. Blood welled up immediately, bright red against his calloused skin. He held his hand over the hatchling's mouth and let a few drops fall between those tiny fangs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dragon's eyes snapped open, burning bright gold like twin suns. Jake gasped as pain exploded through his entire body, starting at his hand and racing up his arm, into his chest, straight into his brain. It felt like someone had plugged him into a live electrical wire and cranked it to maximum. Images flooded his mind. Memories that weren't his. He saw vast planets made of crystal, saw fleets of dragons flying through nebulas, saw civilizations rising and falling across millions of years. He felt emotions that were alien yet somehow familiar. Curiosity. Loneliness. Hope. Fear. All of it crashed into him at once, overwhelming every sense he had. Jake tried to scream but no sound came out. His vision went white, then black, then filled with colors he didn't have names for. He was dimly aware of Duke barking, of his own body hitting the floor, but it all seemed very far away. The connection kept pulling him deeper, showing him more. He saw the dragon's recent memories now. Being stolen from a nest. Rough hands grabbing her. Pain. So much pain. Experiments. Tests. Burns. Then being chained to Duke, left as bait in a trap. Then the images changed. He saw himself through the dragon's eyes. Saw himself as she saw him. Not a threat. Not an enemy. Something else. Something the dragon recognized on an instinctual level. A protector. A guardian. Family. The word echoed through their connection, spoken in a language Jake didn't know but somehow understood perfectly. Bondmate. Soul friend. Champion. Jake woke up on his back, staring at the ceiling. His head felt like it had been split open and put back together wrong. Every muscle in his body ached. Duke was licking his face frantically, and there was a warm weight on his chest. The dragon hatchling was curled up on him, purring. Actually purring, like a cat made of scales and fire. The sound rumbled through Jake's ribs. But more than that, Jake could feel her. Not just physically, but in his mind. He could sense her emotions, her thoughts, her very presence like a warm glow in the back of his consciousness. And somehow, impossibly, he could understand Duke too now. Not words exactly, but intentions. Feelings. The dog was relieved, protective, and incredibly confused about why the scary lizard was now part of their pack. Jake sat up slowly, and the hatchling, who he now knew had chosen the name Ash for herself, climbed onto his shoulder. Her wing was already looking better, the break healing at an impossible rate. The burns on her scales were fading. She felt stronger, more alive. Through their connection, Ash showed him what had happened. The images came clearly now, controlled. A smuggling ring had stolen her from a royal dragon clutch. They'd been kidnapping protected species and selling them to wealthy collectors across the galaxy. But Ash was special, a princess among her kind, worth more than entire planets. The smugglers had chained her to Duke to frame Jake. They'd been watching him, knew he'd reported those unauthorized ships. The plan was simple. Let Jake find the dragon. Report him to the authorities. When the dragon matriarch came for her granddaughter and found her with a human, they'd execute Jake immediately. Then the smugglers would find where Jake had been hiding Ash, would rescue her, and return her to the dragons as heroes. They'd get a massive reward and eliminate someone who was asking too many questions. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that humans were one of the only species in the galaxy capable of forming a true dragon bond. It was something from ancient times, something the dragons themselves thought had been lost forever. The genetic compatibility was rare, maybe 1 in a million humans could do it. And Jake had just done it by accident. Through the bond, Ash explained what this meant. They were connected now, permanently. Her life was his life. His life was hers. They could share thoughts, emotions, even physical sensations if they wanted. As she grew stronger, he would gain some of her abilities. As he learned and experienced things, she would gain his knowledge. They were two beings but also one unit, partners in a way that went deeper than any friendship or family connection. And by ancient dragon law, which still held weight across most of the civilized galaxy, Jake was now Ash's bonded guardian. Anyone who harmed him would answer to the entire Draconite Empire. Anyone who tried to take Ash from him would be declaring war on both species. Jake looked at the tiny dragon on his shoulder, then at Duke sitting faithfully beside him. His simple life as a janitor was definitely over. The people who'd set him up would realize soon that their plan had failed. They'd come for him, try to finish what they started. And when the dragon matriarch arrived looking for her granddaughter, things would get even more complicated. But as Ash nuzzled against his neck and Duke leaned against his leg, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He'd spent so long just surviving, just existing. Now he had something worth fighting for. He stood up, wincing at his sore muscles, and looked at his two companions. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Jake didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every footstep in the hallway made him jump, every announcement over the station's intercom system sent his heart racing. He sat on his floor with Duke's head in his lap and Ash curled up on his chest, planning his next move. Through their bond, he could feel the hatchling growing stronger by the hour, but she was still vulnerable. Still small. Still very much in danger. The news hit the station network around 6 in the morning. Jake watched it on his cracked tablet, his stomach sinking with every word. A dragon hatchling had been stolen from a royal clutch. The matriarch herself, Victoria the Eternal, was personally leading a battle fleet to Nova 7. She'd given the station administrators 72 hours to produce her granddaughter, alive and unharmed. If they failed, she would reduce the entire station to atoms. No negotiations. No second chances. The announcement included a hologram of Ash, rotating slowly, showing every angle of her distinctive scale patterns. A 1 billion credit reward for information leading to her recovery. Execution for anyone found harboring her. Jake's hands shook as he watched. 72 hours. 3 days before a dragon armada turned this station and everyone on it into space dust. Including innocent families, kids, people who had nothing to do with any of this. The weight of it crushed down on him. Through their bond, Ash sent him a wave of guilt and sorrow. She hadn't asked for this. Hadn't wanted anyone to die because of her. Jake scratched behind her tiny horns and sent back reassurance. This wasn't her fault. None of this was her fault. By noon, the station administrator held a press conference. Director Raymond Blake stood at a podium, his Tlaxian features arranged in an expression of concern that looked fake even through the video feed. Jake had seen Blake around, always in expensive suits, always surrounded by security. The guy ran Nova 7 like his personal kingdom. Blake announced that they had identified a suspect. Security footage showed a human janitor, Jake Martinez, in the area where the hatchling was believed to have been held. Further investigation revealed Martinez had been filing complaints about unauthorized ships, clearly trying to deflect attention from his own criminal activities. Blake assured the matriarch that Martinez would be apprehended within hours and face justice. Jake watched himself on screen, a grainy image pulled from some security camera. They'd already decided he was guilty. Already manufactured their evidence. Blake was going to hand him over to save his own skin, probably claim he'd heroically solved the case. Ash showed him more through their bond. Flashes of memory, things she'd overheard while chained up. Blake's voice, talking to the smugglers. Blake was part of it. Maybe even running the whole operation. He'd been using his position to move illegal goods and stolen creatures through Nova 7 for years. The dragon kidnapping was supposed to be his biggest score yet. Jake made a decision right there. He wasn't going to run. Wasn't going to hide in his apartment waiting for security to kick down his door. If he was going down, he was taking these people with him. He'd expose Blake, expose the smuggling ring, free whatever other creatures they were holding. Maybe it wouldn't save his life, but at least the truth would come out. He packed light. His old marine duffel with some clothes, his medic kit, protein bars, and a portable data unit. Duke's leash and food. Ash rode on his shoulder, small enough that he could hide her under his jacket if needed. She was growing fast though. Already she was twice the size she'd been last night, maybe as big as a small cat now. Jake knew where to start looking. Those unauthorized ships he'd reported had been docking in Bay 17, down in the restricted area where only certain personnel were allowed. If the smugglers had a base of operations on the station, it would be somewhere near there. Getting there meant crossing half the station without being spotted. Security was everywhere now, checking identification, scanning crowds. Jake took the maintenance tunnels, routes he'd learned over months of janitorial work. The paths nobody else knew about, filled with pipes and cables and the guts of the station that kept everything running. Duke's nose led them around patrol routes. The old pit bull could smell security officers from 50 meters away, giving Jake time to duck into side passages or hide behind equipment. Ash helped too, her senses sharper than any human's. She could hear heartbeats through walls, could sense body heat. Together, they were better than any surveillance system. It took 4 hours to reach Bay 17. Jake's maintenance keycard still worked, apparently security hadn't thought to deactivate it yet. He slipped inside, Duke and Ash close behind him. The bay looked normal at first. Just another docking area with supply crates and loading equipment. But Ash made a low growling sound, and through their bond Jake felt her recognition. She'd been here. This was where they'd kept her before chaining her to Duke. Jake found the hidden door behind a false panel. It led down, deep into the station's substructure. His heart hammered as he descended the stairs, Duke's claws clicking on metal, Ash tense on his shoulder. The corridor at the bottom was lined with cages. Dozens of them. And they weren't empty. Jake's breath caught. He'd expected maybe a few creatures, maybe some evidence he could use. This was so much worse. Celestial whales, their massive forms somehow compressed into tanks too small for them, their songs of pain echoing through the metal. Phoenix hatchlings huddled in darkened boxes, their flames suppressed by chemical restraints. Star serpents coiled in agony, their scales dim. Creatures Jake didn't even recognize, species he'd never seen, all suffering. Lab equipment lined the walls. Computers displaying data, experiments tracking how much pain each species could endure, how their abilities could be extracted and weaponized. This wasn't just smuggling. This was something darker. Jake started taking pictures with his data unit, documenting everything. This was the evidence he needed. This would expose Blake and everyone involved. He uploaded it all to a secure server, one he'd set up years ago when he was still paranoid from his military days. A dead drop that would automatically release the data if he didn't check in every 24 hours. Then he started opening cages. The creatures were weak, traumatized, but Jake couldn't leave them here. Through his bond with Ash, he could project feelings of safety, of help. The other creatures seemed to sense it, seemed to understand that this human was different. A phoenix chick climbed onto his arm, its feathers warm. A young star serpent coiled around Duke, who surprisingly didn't seem to mind. Ash chirped encouragement to them all, her confidence growing. That's when the alarms started blaring. Red lights flooded the corridor. Heavy boots thundered on the stairs. Jake had maybe 30 seconds before armed security came through that door. He looked at the freed creatures, at Duke standing ready to fight, at Ash who was now glowing with barely contained energy. They couldn't fight their way through a whole security team. Couldn't make it back through the station with all these creatures in tow. But maybe they didn't need to. Through their bond, Ash showed him another way. A memory of the smugglers bringing in new ships, using a hidden dock that connected directly to this facility. If they could reach it, if they could steal a ship, they might make it to the asteroid field where the smugglers had their main base. Where more creatures were being held. The door burst open. Security officers poured through, weapons raised. At the front was Blake himself, his face twisted with rage. He'd probably been monitoring the bay, had known the moment Jake accessed it. Jake grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall and threw it at the nearest officer, buying himself precious seconds. Duke charged, all teeth and fury, making them scatter. The freed creatures panicked and surged forward, a wave of desperate beings all trying to escape at once. In the chaos, Jake ran. Ash clung to his shoulder, directing him through the bond, showing him which turns to take. Duke caught up, panting hard, the star serpent still wrapped around him somehow. Behind them, Blake was screaming orders, security trying to organize, the freed creatures causing havoc. They burst through another door and Jake's heart soared. A small transport shuttle sat in a hidden docking bay, already powered up. The smugglers must have been planning a run. Keys were still in the ignition, supplies loaded. Jake didn't hesitate. He jumped into the pilot's seat, Duke scrambling up beside him, Ash chirping urgently. His fingers flew over controls he hadn't touched in years. Military training coming back. The Phoenix chick and a few other small creatures had followed them, huddled in the cargo area. The shuttle's engines roared to life. The bay doors ahead of them were closed, but Jake had stopped caring about following rules. He punched the throttle and aimed straight for them. The shuttle smashed through the doors in an explosion of metal and sparks, alarms shrieking. Then they were out, free in open space, Station Nova 7 falling away behind them. That's when the defense grid activated. Blake had triggered the station's weapon systems. Turrets swiveled, locking onto the stolen shuttle. Energy blasts lit up the void around them. Jake yanked the controls hard, dodging, weaving, his old combat pilot instincts taking over. But the shuttle was a civilian transport, slow and clumsy. The weapon's fire was too accurate, too concentrated. A blast clipped their engine. Alarms shrieked. Another hit tore through the hull. The shuttle started spinning, systems failing, Jake fighting for control that wouldn't come. They were dead. That was it. Jake had tried, had failed, and now they were going to die in the cold of space. Then Ash stood up on his shoulder and screamed. The sound that came from Ash wasn't anything a creature her size should have been able to make. It was ancient, primal, a roar that somehow echoed in the vacuum of space itself. Jake felt it through their bond, felt power surge through the connection like lightning through a wire. The tiny dragon on his shoulder began to glow, her scales blazing with an inner fire that grew brighter with each passing second. Then she exploded outward in a burst of flame and light. Jake threw his arms up instinctively, but the fire didn't burn him. Through the shattered cockpit window, he watched in absolute shock as Ash grew. And grew. And kept growing. Within seconds she went from the size of a house cat to a full-grown horse, her wings spreading wide, her body wreathed in stellar fire that burned hotter than anything Jake had ever seen. The shuttle was breaking apart around them, pieces flying off into space. Jake should have been terrified, should have been gasping for air as the hull depressurized. But he wasn't. He could breathe just fine. A bubble of shimmering energy surrounded him and Duke, some kind of protective field that Ash was projecting through their bond. Ash's massive form circled back, and Jake suddenly understood what she wanted. He grabbed Duke, held the pit bull tight against his chest, and jumped through the disintegrating shuttle just as another weapon's blast tore it completely apart. They fell through space, and then Ash was there, her back broad and strong beneath them. Duke scrambled for purchase on her scales, whimpering but trusting. The Phoenix chick and Star Serpent clung to her tail, somehow safe in her aura. Jake had no saddle, no safety harness, nothing but his grip on Ash's neck ridges as she banked hard and dove toward the asteroid field. Energy blasts from the station's defense grid followed them, bright streaks of deadly light. But Ash was faster now, impossibly fast. She twisted and spun through space like she'd been born to it, like the void itself was just another sky to fly through. Through their bond, Jake felt her exhilaration. This was what she was meant to be. Not a scared hatchling in a cage, but a dragon in flight, powerful and free. Her genetic memories were flooding back, thousands of years of dragon instinct awakening all at once. And somehow, Jake was part of it all, experiencing everything she felt. The asteroid field swallowed them up. Massive rocks tumbled through the void, some as small as cars, others the size of buildings. Ash navigated through them like they were standing still, her senses far beyond human comprehension. The defense grid fire fell away. They'd made it out of range. Duke barked once, loud and triumphant, his fear replaced by pure adrenaline. Jake couldn't help it, he started laughing. They were riding a dragon through an asteroid field in the middle of space. If anyone from his old Marine unit could see him now, they'd never believe it. Ash showed him images through their bond. The smuggler's base, hidden deep in the asteroid field. She remembered the route from when they transported her, remembered every turn and landmark. Jake held on as she dove deeper into the field, weaving between rocks, following a path only she could see. The base came into view after 20 minutes. It was built into one of the larger asteroids, camouflaged to look like natural rock formations. Sophisticated too. Jake could see defensive turrets, shielded docking bays, sensor arrays. This wasn't some temporary hideout. This was a permanent operation, probably worth hundreds of millions of credits. The turrets activated immediately, tracking Ash as she approached. But here's the thing about automated defense systems. They're programmed to recognize known threats. Spaceships, missiles, armed vessels. Nobody had programmed them to deal with a dragon. Ash tucked her wings and dove straight at the shields protecting the base. Jake felt heat building in her chest through their bond, felt ancient fire gathering. Dragon fire, the kind that had forged stars in the old legends. She opened her mouth and released it in a concentrated beam. The shields didn't just fail. They melted. The energy barrier designed to stop military-grade weapons simply ceased to exist under dragon fire that burned at temperatures no modern technology could match. Ash crashed through the gap she'd created, smashing into the asteroid's surface with enough force to shake the entire structure. She was too big to fit in the corridors, but she didn't need to. She tore open the asteroid's exterior like peeling an orange, her claws ripping through reinforced metal and rock alike. Alarms blared inside the base. Jake heard shouting, saw smugglers and mercenaries running. Ash set him and Duke down near one of the breaches she'd created, along with their small group of rescued creatures. Through their bond, she sent him clear instructions. Free the prisoners. She'd handle the guards. The Phoenix chick stayed with Jake, providing light, while the Star Serpent slithered ahead, scouting. Jake pulled out his old sidearm, the one he'd kept hidden in his quarters all these years. Military issue, still in perfect condition. He moved through the corridors with Duke at his side, following the sounds of captive creatures in distress. His training came back like muscle memory. Check corners, watch for ambushes, move with purpose. The first mercenary he encountered was a Kravix, 7 feet tall in powered armor. The guy raised some kind of plasma rifle, but Duke was faster. The pit bull hit him low, jaws clamping onto an exposed joint. Jake followed up with 2 shots to the armor's weak points. The mercenary went down hard. More came. Jake fought like he was back in the service, every move calculated. Duke was right there with him, fearless, taking down opponents twice his size. The Phoenix chick surprised everyone by breathing fire at a group of smugglers, sending them running. Even the little Star Serpent helped, its venomous bite dropping guards who thought they were safe. Jake found the main holding area and his heart sank. This was so much worse than the station facility. Dozens of creatures, maybe hundreds, all in various states of suffering. The cages were stacked 3 high, barely large enough for the beings inside them. The smell was overwhelming. Pain and fear hung in the air like a physical presence. He started opening every cage he could reach, smashing control panels, breaking locks. The creatures poured out, confused and terrified but free. Some ran. Some stayed to help. A massive celestial whale, compressed impossibly small in a containment tank, broke free with Jake's help and immediately started using its sonic abilities to shatter more cages. Outside, Ash was facing down the base's main defenses. Jake felt echoes of the fight through their bond. Mercenaries in combat mechs, automated weapons platforms, even a few attack drones. But Ash was growing stronger by the minute, the bond with Jake feeding her power while her own ancient abilities awakened. She was becoming what she was always meant to be. Then Jake found the facility's commander. The private office at the base's center. He kicked in the door, weapon raised, expecting security. What he found instead made his blood run cold. A dragon. A full-grown draconite, massive and scarred, sitting behind a desk like this was a normal office job. His scales were dark, almost black, twisted with old injuries. His eyes were cold and calculating. Through the bond with Ash, Jake felt her sudden terror and recognition. Victor. That's what Ash called him. A dragon who'd been exiled from their people for unspeakable cruelty. The smuggling operation's true leader. Victor smiled, showing rows of razor-sharp teeth. He spoke in perfect English, his voice smooth as silk. He'd been expecting them, he said. Been monitoring Ash's growth through sensors embedded in the station. A human bonded to a dragon, something he'd thought impossible. Fascinating. Worth studying. Worth taking apart to see how it worked. The room filled with dark energy. Victor had been doing more than just smuggling creatures. He'd been stealing their powers, siphoning their abilities into himself through dark technology that surrounded his lair. He'd made himself stronger than any normal dragon, fed on the suffering of hundreds of beings. Jake fired his weapon but the bullet simply bounced off Victor's scales. The dragon laughed and raised one massive claw, energy crackling around it. This was the blast that had broken countless creatures before. This would kill Jake instantly. Duke barked desperately. The Phoenix chick screamed. And Jake, seeing death coming, did the only thing he could think of. He threw himself forward instead of back, refusing to die running away. The dark energy blast caught him square in the chest. Pain exploded through every nerve. Jake felt himself flying backward, felt his ribs breaking, felt organs rupturing. He was dead. Had to be dead. No human could survive that. But the bond with Ash flared to life like a supernova. Her power flooded into him, desperate, trying to save him. And somehow, impossibly, it did more than that. It changed him. Jake hit the wall and slid down, gasping. His chest should have been a crater. Instead, there were scales. Actual dragon scales running up his arms, across his ribs, golden and shimmering just like Ash's. His hands had changed too, fingers tipped with claws. His eyes burned within a fire. When he breathed out, smoke came with it. The bond had saved him, but it had also transformed him. Human and dragon, merged in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Jake felt Ash's presence closer than ever, felt their two souls intertwined so completely he couldn't tell where he ended and she began. Victor's confident expression faltered. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humans couldn't channel dragon power. Couldn't survive it. Jake stood up, and his body moved with grace and strength he'd never possessed before. Duke barked encouragement. The Phoenix chick's flames burned brighter. When Ash burst through the wall in an explosion of rock and metal, she and Jake moved as one. They didn't need words, didn't need plans. The bond let them coordinate perfectly. Ash attacked from one side, Jake from the other, and Duke carried Victor's flanks. The fight was brutal, destructive, shaking the entire asteroid base. Victor was powerful, but he was alone. Jake and Ash were two beings fighting as one, and they had something Victor never had. They fought not from cruelty or greed, but to protect others. To save lives. In the end, it was Jake who landed the final blow. His fist, covered in dragon scales and burning with shared fire, punched through Victor's dark energy shield and struck true. The exiled dragon fell, his stolen powers dissipating. The base shook violently, systems failing, structure collapsing. The freed creatures were already escaping, pouring out into space, some flying under their own power, others carried by those who could. Jake climbed onto Ash's back with Duke, and together they led the exodus. Behind them, the smuggler base tore itself apart. Ahead, somewhere in the vast darkness, Station Nova 7 waited with answers they still needed to provide. But for now, Jake just held onto his dragon and his dog, and let himself feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Victory. The approach to Station Nova 7 was nothing like Jake had imagined. He'd expected weapons fire, hostile intercepts, maybe a quick death before he could explain anything. Instead, he got silence. The entire station seemed to be holding its breath as Ash glided toward the main docking concourse with an army of freed creatures behind her. She'd grown even more during the flight back. Now she was easily the size of a small shuttle, her wingspan stretching 50 feet across. Her scales gleamed like molten gold in the station's external lights. Duke sat in front of Jake on her back, tail wagging, completely comfortable with space travel now. The Phoenix chick rode on Jake's shoulder, and dozens of other creatures followed in their wake like a parade. Through the massive observation windows, Jake could see crowds gathering. Thousands of station residents, faces pressed to the glass, recording everything on their devices. News drones buzzed around like insects, broadcasting live to half the galaxy. This wasn't going to be a quiet arrival. Ash landed on the main concourse with surprising grace for something her size. Her claws scraped against the deck plating, leaving grooves in the metal. The landing bay's atmospheric shield shimmered as it adjusted to contain all the creatures pouring in behind them. Jake dismounted, his legs shaky, Duke jumping down beside him. The scales on his arms hadn't gone away. He could feel them under his jacket, could feel the dragon fire still burning in his chest. The crowd parted, and Jake's stomach dropped. She was here. Victoria the Eternal, matriarch of the Draconai Empire. She was absolutely massive, easily 3 times Ash's current size, her scales a deep crimson that seemed to absorb light. Her eyes were ancient, intelligent, and currently fixed directly on Jake with an intensity that made him want to run. Behind Victoria stood what had to be her personal guard. A dozen full-grown dragons, each one capable of destroying the entire station single-handedly. Director Blake was there too, flanked by station security, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes calculating. The guy was already trying to figure out how to spin this in his favor. Jake felt Ash tense beside him, felt her instinctive fear of the matriarch mixed with desperate hope. Through their bond, he sensed what she wanted to do. She moved first, lowering her head in a gesture of respect, and Jake felt himself doing the same. It felt right somehow, natural. Victoria approached slowly, each step making the deck plates vibrate. She circled Ash once, examining her granddaughter with eyes that missed nothing. She saw the healed wing, the healthy scales, the newfound confidence. Then those ancient eyes turned to Jake, and he felt like she was looking through him, seeing every thought, every memory, every secret he'd ever had. The matriarch spoke, and her voice resonated in Jake's bones. It wasn't English, wasn't any language Jake knew, but through his bond with Ash he understood every word perfectly. Victoria asked how this was possible. How a human janitor had formed a dragon bond, something her people had believed extinct for 10,000 years. Jake swallowed hard and told the truth. All of it. Finding Ash chained to Duke, the desperate attempt to save her, the bond that formed when he gave her his blood. He showed her through Ash's memories, letting Victoria see everything that had happened. The smuggling operation, Blake's involvement, Victor's cruelty, the rescued creatures. He held nothing back. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. The entire station watched, waiting. Blake shifted nervously. His security detail looked ready to bolt. Even the news drones seemed to hover more quietly. Then Victoria did something nobody expected. She laughed. It was a sound like thunder rolling across mountains, deep and genuine. She announced in a voice that carried across the entire concourse that the bond was real. That Jake Martinez, human janitor, had become the first dragon champion in 10 millennia. That by ancient law, he was now family to the Draconai Empire, under their protection and entitled to their support. Blake's face went white. He started to speak, started to present his manufactured evidence, but Victoria silenced him with a look that could have melted steel. She'd seen everything through the shared memories. Knew exactly who was responsible for her granddaughter's suffering. What happened next was swift and brutal. Victoria's guard seized Blake and his co-conspirators. The matriarch delivered judgment right there, in front of everyone, invoking laws that predated most of the current galactic civilizations. For crimes against a dragon princess, for trafficking in protected species, for conspiracy and corruption, there was only one sentence. Jake had to look away. Even knowing what Blake had done, watching someone die wasn't something he'd ever gotten comfortable with. Duke pressed against his leg, offering comfort. Ash nuzzled his side, her own feelings a complicated mix of justice and sorrow. Then Victoria turned back to Jake, and her expression softened slightly. She made him an offer. He could return to his old life, and she would ensure nobody ever bothered him again. Or he could accept his role as Ash's bonded guardian, become humanity's official ambassador to the Draconite Empire, and help build something new. A sanctuary for creatures who needed protection, a place where humans and other species could learn to form bonds like his. Jake looked at Ash, who was watching him with those golden eyes full of hope. He looked at Duke, who'd stuck with him through everything. He thought about all those creatures they'd freed, about others out there still suffering. He thought about his tiny apartment, his mop and bucket, his simple quiet life. Then he thought about flying through space on Dragonback, about the bond that let him understand alien minds, about the scales on his arms that proved he was something new now. Something more. The choice wasn't even hard. Jake accepted. The next 6 months passed in a blur. The station's lower levels, the areas that had been abandoned and forgotten, were converted into a massive sanctuary. Funding came from everywhere once word spread about what Jake had done. The Galactic Council wanted to make amends. Corporations wanted good publicity. Private donors wanted to support the first dragon champion in recorded history. Jake ran it all with a team of volunteers, mostly humans who'd heard his story and wanted to help. Turned out humans had a real talent for this kind of work. That instinct to adopt and protect anything with eyes translated surprisingly well to alien species. Other bonds started forming, not just with dragons but with all kinds of creatures. Humans bonded with star serpents, with phoenix, with beings nobody had thought could connect with other species. It was like humanity had found their calling. Ash grew steadily, already the size of a small building. She was still young, still learning, but through their bond Jake helped guide her. He taught her about human concepts like compassion and justice, and she taught him about dragon wisdom and ancient knowledge. They learned from each other, grew together. Duke became something of a celebrity. The pit bull who'd been chained to a dragon princess now wandered the sanctuary like he owned it, beloved by every creature there. He'd helped save them all, and they knew it. Even beings that should have been terrified of Earth predators would let Duke sleep against them, trusting the old dog completely. Jake still cleaned sometimes. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. There was something meditative about it, something grounding. Though admittedly, mopping floors while riding a dragon the size of a fighter jet did take some getting used to. Duke would bark from his special saddle, and Ash would rumble with amusement, and Jake would just shake his head at how weird his life had become. The media called him a hero. The Galactic Council gave him awards. Other species started looking at humans differently, with respect instead of dismissal. But Jake didn't do it for any of that. He did it because when he'd found a scared, injured creature chained to his dog, he'd made a choice. The same choice he'd made when he found Duke in that alley years ago. The choice to help. One evening, Jake stood on the sanctuary's observation deck watching ships come and go. Ash was beside him, her head resting on the deck, Duke asleep between her forelegs. More creatures arrived every day now, brought by people who'd heard about the sanctuary. Some were rescues from bad situations. Some were just lost and needed help. All of them found safety here. A young reporter approached, asking for an interview. She wanted to know how a simple janitor had become one of the most important figures in the galaxy. How he'd formed an impossible bond. How he'd changed everything. Jake smiled and scratched Duke behind the ears. Through his bond with Ash, he felt her contentment, her happiness, her love. He thought about his answer carefully. In the end, he told the reporter the truth. He'd just done what any human would do. He'd helped a friend who needed him. Found a creature suffering and refused to walk away. It wasn't complicated. Wasn't heroic. It was just the right thing to do. The reporter pressed for more. Surely there was something special about him, some quality that let him succeed where others would have failed. Jake looked at Ash, then at Duke, then at all the bonded pairs visible through the windows, humans and aliens working together in ways nobody had thought possible. He shook his head. There wasn't anything special about him specifically. But maybe there was something special about humans in general. That stubborn refusal to give up on others. That tendency to pack bond with anything and everything. That deep-seated belief that if something needed help, you helped it, consequences be damned. In a galaxy built on contracts and careful alliances, on species looking out only for themselves, humanity had stumbled onto something powerful. They'd weaponized compassion. Made empathy into a superpower. And maybe, Jake thought as Ash nuzzled his shoulder and Duke snored peacefully, maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed. The reporter thanked him and left to file her story. Jake stayed on the observation deck as the station's artificial night cycle began, the lights dimming to simulate evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More creatures to help. More bonds to form. More work to do. But tonight, Jake Martinez, former Marine, former Janitor, current Dragon Champion and Sanctuary Director, was exactly where he needed to be. With his dragon, his dog, and a galaxy full of possibilities stretching out before him. And that shocked everyone most of all. Not that a human could bond with a dragon. Not that he could transform or breathe fire or any of the other impossible things. What shocked them was simpler and more profound. That when it mattered most, when the easy choice was to walk away and save himself, a human chose to risk everything for a creature he'd just met. That choice changed everything. And it all started with a janitor, a pit bull, and a dragon chained together by fate.